Hey everyone, it's Jason. On today's episode of The Thermostat with Jason Barger, I'm joined by Boris Maguire and Oli Raison, all the way from Kenya. And we dive into their Safarini Leadership Project, where they guide global executives on foot through northern Kenya's remote mountains and deserts, facilitating a transformational journey with indigenous tribal elders. Our conversation is a fascinating look into how different parts of the world intersect with words like leadership, culture, and engagement. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast, wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today. So glad you're here. So glad you made it. We're in season 9, which means we have over 300 episodes now of the podcast, which is pretty cool. Thanks to everybody who's new to the podcast for jumping in and joining. So glad this is growing and spreading. If you're interested in any topics related to leadership, culture, mindset, accountability, trust, communication, whatever that is that you're thinking about, all you got to do is Google my name, Jason Barger, and whatever you're looking for. And in those 300, chances are you're going to find something that resonates with you. We've also been fortunate to have so many great friends and colleagues and thought leaders from around the world that have joined me on this podcast. So many great chats like the one we're going to have today that you can go back and check out. If you're somebody that's been with us for, since the beginning, then so glad this continues to add value to you. And my commitment every time that we sit down to record one of these is I want this to meet you where you are. I want it to kind of breathe some good oxygen into you and help you think about the temperature that you're trying to set in your life and your work and the cultures that you're trying to create. So glad everybody's here. If you'll do me the quick favor, of course, I keep being told I have to tell everybody about this every episode. So rate the podcast 5 stars, leave an authentic review in your own words, share the podcast with other people, subscribe, of course. All of those things, that helps amplify the messages, and that's the whole point, is to share good stuff in the world and continue to help it spread even further. So thanks to everybody that takes the time and helps amplify these messages. I'm very excited to invite my guests for today into this chat in just a minute. Boris Maguire and Oli Raison are the founders of Safarini Leadership. They guide global executives on foot through northern Kenya's remote mountains and deserts, facilitating a transformational leadership journey with indigenous tribal elders. This labor of love was born from Boris and Oli's shared experiences as CEOs, leading cross-cultural teams in Africa's tech and energy sectors, as well as their shared love for the land and culture of Kenya's northern frontier. Originally from the U.S. and the UK, Boris and Oli have spent the last decade adventuring through Africa's dynamic business ecosystem and through northern Kenya's sacred and remote landscapes, where they forged relationships with indigenous elders of the Samburu tribe. Deeply changed by the Samburu approach to living and leading, Boris and Oli were moved to help conserve their culture and share their ancient wisdom as a means to address the disconnection, disengagement, and ill health of modern society. Blending indigenous wisdom with modern psychology, neuroscience, and coaching methodologies, Safarini Leadership is now entering its 3rd year, providing transformational leadership development experiences in Africa for leaders from around the world. I've been intrigued by what they're doing. I certainly love traveling the world and experiential learning myself. Anybody that knows my background in servant leadership and a desire to learn from other people around the world probably understands why maybe I was interested in connecting with these guys. Had a couple of great conversations to date and excited to carry that chat into today's podcast. So welcome to the pod, Oli and Boris.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, great to be with you all. You all are in Kenya right now, right? And so, amen to this technology and the fact that we can be connecting in this way. I love it. Let me start out with you, Boris. Since my listeners are just getting introduced to you guys, tell us, beyond just kind of where you physically are, because you're in Kenya, but something about you that we wouldn't know, or something that might be interesting beyond just what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah, well, you covered a great deal of it, so I appreciate that intro. Perhaps something you wouldn't know about me is, while I've been in Kenya for the past decade, as you said, working largely in the tech sector, my career began, this is kind of a third, even fourth career for both Oli and myself. And my career began as a teacher in the Dominican Republic, and then somehow made my way to the national security sector, working in Washington, D.C. for a lot of years. And then there are about two more careers in between that and what I'm doing now. So it's been a long, winding road to get to Safarini Leadership, but eventually for Oli and myself, all roads led to Kenya, and all roads led to this initiative that we really love and are excited to talk about.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to share you guys and share what you're doing with the audience. Oli, you both have been passionate and clearly compelled by the approach to life by these indigenous tribal leaders that you've experienced. How would you articulate how they think about this term leadership, and what would you share, again, as people are just being introduced to some of these concepts, what would you share with the listeners?
Sure. Well, there's a lot. And I guess before I get too much into leadership, it might be helpful to give you a little bit of context about the environment that these people are living in. Okay, so
Yep.
The Samburu tribe are living in northern Kenya, which in mine and Boris's opinion, I think is just the most spectacular, beautiful, stunning part of the world. Lots of deserts, mountains with forests, but it's very austere. It's very harsh climate, drought susceptible. And these people, they are nomadic pastoralists. And so their wealth is not sitting in a bank account, it's actually in their livestock. And so if they have a drought year, they can potentially lose everything. And one of the things that we were quite taken with is how resilient the Samburu tribe are. They're a long way from Nairobi, where the political decisions are made. They're very poor by Western standards. And yet they're very, very content, and they have a very strong sense of resilience. And that all really kind of stems from their belief in this concept called Naboisho. Naboisho is a Ma word. Ma is their language, which they share with the Maasai tribe. But it basically means, or it translates as coming together. Okay, and it's similar to the concept of Ubuntu, which is another African philosophy. But they often say we are because they are. Okay, which sort of communicates this interconnectedness, this interdependence. And it's that strong sense of connection, and that strong shared purpose and very strong shared values that really enable them to be such a resilient people. And so their leadership is really a reflection of these values and a reflection of this concept of Naboisho, whereby leadership is very much in service of others. There are no titles, there are no trinkets, there's no personal gain. Everything is for the well-being of the tribe and for each other. There's no single leader. Leadership is shared and it's collective, and it's very much considered to be an act of service. And so in that regard, it's actually a very humble and grounded thing. And it seems to be in very stark contrast to leadership in the West, which we see. I'm actually reading a book at the moment from the late 70s called The Culture of Narcissism. And it talks about how Western society really is structured in a way that actually kind of ironically rewards narcissism. And I think we see a lot of that in our leaders these days. We see a lot of people who are really kind of clinging to power and amassing huge personal wealth. There's none of that with the Samburu tribe. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from them, and I'm sure from other different peoples across the world.
Yeah, no, appreciate you giving that context. And certainly any of my listeners, when we talk about leadership, certainly on this podcast, and talk about flipping the pyramid upside down and this concept of servant leadership and leading from the heart and from values and from the inside out, that oftentimes, yes, in the Western culture and other places around the world, but that view of leadership of being about the top down and it being about power and control and coercion and all that, of really shifting the way we even think about it, and that leadership isn't just a lifestyle; it's a worldview. It's not a style. It's how we show up to the world. And so, really, my listeners are gonna connect with even the way that you were just describing that, Boris. I did a recent podcast episode. I know you guys commented to me about the Global Flourishing Study that came out too long. Again, for my listeners, you can go back and hear the whole episode that I did of talking about what came out of this study. But some of it is stuff that, doesn't necessarily surprise us, but yet anchors in us this idea of what does it really mean to flourish. I'm wondering what jumped out to you. How do these teachings, how do the trips that the experiences that you all are leading, how does this help us better understand this idea of flourishing?
Yeah. We're very compelled by this notion of flourishing, which I think when we first heard it kind of sounded a bit woo-woo, but we've come to really understand like the academic rigor behind it. And when we first created Safarini Leadership, I think our primary insight for Oli and myself was that as foreign business executives leading cross-cultural teams in a very different culture in Africa, in the business context, had really accelerated our leadership and been very formative, right? It forces you to be quite self-aware, quite reflective, and that ultimately gives you a little bit of versatility and adaptability that might be harder to come by if you were operating in a monoculture, particularly your own. So that was our initial insight. And we thought that by spending time with our friends in the North, which is an even more radically different culture, we could sort of provide a kind of crash course, an immersive crash course that delivers that kind of versatility and adaptability and self-awareness. And those remain really important outcomes of what we deliver. But over time, I think what we've realized is truly transformational for people is the sense of interconnection that Oli described, that Naboisho philosophy within Samburu society, and how it drives resilience. And we came across flourishing in the Global Human Flourishing Study actually from one of our first clients who today is on our advisory board, and her name's Dr. Karen Dahl. She's a psychologist and a coach, and she's chair of Harvard's Global Human Flourishing Program's team on flourishing at work. And she really helped us understand, like I said, that there is academic rigor and a great deal of that rigor being invested in understanding what flourishing looks like. And so we started exploring that study and noted, like you said, it's not necessarily surprising, but whereas things like nutrition and exercise and things you might have in self-control over, the other two pillars of flourishing were purpose and really meaningful human connection. And so, like Oli said, that's something that the Samburu and I think a lot of indigenous societies have in spades, but these are increasingly difficult to find and to kind of integrate into our life in a Western or kind of modern lifestyle. But they're at the essence of Samburu culture, because Naboisho is all about connection, and the society, as we can get into, is really designed to imbue purpose in people from an incredibly early age, from like the age of 4, and kind of through conversations with Karen and others who are in this flourishing space and looking at the study, we've kind of come to understand what another psychologist, Bill von Hippel, describes as this balance between autonomy and connection that are kind of at the heart of the human struggle, perhaps, and kind of striking that balance, and how perhaps modern society has really fallen out of balance, right? With a huge emphasis on independence and autonomy, but at the expense of that connection. And we really see that in all sorts of indicators, religious practices are down, union memberships, club memberships, relationships, fertility, marriages, and then all sorts of mental health challenges and screen time are all kind of skyrocketing. So we're very digitally connected, but physically and emotionally and at a human level quite disconnected. So I think our view is that, that disconnection surely impacts leadership. This notion that we have a separate personal and professional life, I think is somewhat false. Your personal and your professional lives are really not that firewalled. And so if we're not flourishing in life, at home, in our families, in our relationships, our friendships, how can we really flourish as a leader and lead flourishing teams? So on the Safarini journeys, we're trying to immerse clients in this indigenous culture of flourishing and show them kind of a return to that balance between not foregoing autonomy and independence, but balancing it with connections. And we walk alongside indigenous leaders, elders from this culture to really understand it and witness it, not just read about it or talk about it during a training. And Oli and my job is really just to facilitate that learning. And then also, what is the application? Because we're not suggesting that our participants will flourish by recreating Samburu society in
Right.
New York or Ohio or California, but that there are lessons here. There are opportunities for learning, for becoming self-aware, and ultimately integrating this balance and this prioritization of flourishing and connection into your life, into your leadership.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll just speak personally from my own life, but some of the most powerful moments of my life, some of it, and Oli, I know we've talked about this, I think in our first conversation, at least touched on it briefly, but for a decade of my life, one of the things I was doing is leading servant leadership projects to build houses internationally for families living in across Mexico and the Dominican Republic and some other projects and all that. And some of the most powerful moments of that learning is to sit with folks and to watch that even families and people that living in environments that, again, in most Western viewpoints and or most human viewpoints of like, man, they have so little, and yet in so many ways that there were other elements that they had of that brought them happiness and they were flourishing in some ways and really challenged in other ways. And yet that experience that reminds us again of what does it truly mean to flourish is so powerful. And so again, I think the things that came out of that study are not surprising in a lot of ways, but pointing us back to the power and the importance of purpose and those connections that we have. And oh, by the way, not just for our personal lives, as you said, again, because we're not separate from our work and our careers and our life's work. But what's so fascinating too is when those things are better aligned, our performance actually goes up in all of those areas. I'm a better husband, I'm a better father, I'm a better, and oh, by the way, I'm better at whatever, quote unquote, the mission of my work is. So I think it's just fascinating, great stuff. Oli, in organizations around the world, there's a tremendous, chatter about kind of generational differences and understanding different approaches and desired for better collaboration. I see this in every organization I support. It's this changing and transitioning of different generations, what they're looking at. What is the Samburu? How would they see that? And I know there's a refreshing kind of view that they bring to that. What can be learned from their approach to that generational differences that we're experiencing? But let's take a break. Let's pause for a second, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com. jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
Yeah, so I think in the West, we tend to almost pit different generations against one another. You have younger people blaming older people for capturing all the resources, and older people accusing younger people of not working hard enough. And it feels a little bit zero sum at times. And the Samburu have a very unusual sort of social structure, I guess, whereby if we can just focus on boys for a moment, essentially they all graduate through life in what they call an age-set system, which means that they all graduate en masse every kind of 15 years or so. So what that looks like is for the first sort of 15 years, children are children. They're given responsibility very early from the age of about 6. They're given a goat to look after. And then by the time they're about 10 or 11, they're actually expected to be responsible enough to manage their father's entire livestock. Now, bearing in mind what I said a moment ago about how a family's wealth is not sitting in the bank, it's actually their livestock. And so really what these people are doing is giving their children responsibility to look after their entire wealth. And by the time a boy gets to about 15, he then is circumcised through an initiation ceremony, and he becomes a warrior. And so for the next 15 years, his role is to serve and to protect. It's almost a bit like military service, but all of the young men who are warriors, their job is to protect and to be in service to anybody that requires them to do anything. After about 15 years of that life, they then graduate to becoming a junior elder, and that's really a period of their lives where they get to settle down, they marry, they build a home, they start to accumulate
before we dive into that topic,
wealth,
let's take a break. Let's pause for a second.
They really learn
and we'll be
the
right
ways
back.
of the elders. And then after another 15 years, they become a senior elder, and that's where they really have responsibility for leadership of the tribe. And after another 15 years, they're essentially pushed into a kind of a forced retirement where they actually hand the reins over to the next generation coming up. And they're still on hand for advice. They obviously have a huge amount of wisdom at this point, but they have formally handed over the responsibility of leadership to the next generation. And so what does that mean? Well, this is a society that doesn't really have any concept of meritocracy, which is really interesting because I think meritocracy is something that I and Boris have always believed in, but there is no cherry picking for talent amongst the younger people. They don't identify leadership potential in an individual and then promote them over and above their peers. Every young man is given a mentor from the generation above, and everybody has the same investment in them as a potential leader because they are expected to all collectively take on that responsibility for leadership. So it's very, very different.
I love we've exchanged some messages about this concept, and I love this idea of that all are kind of expected and invested in to carry the cultural torch.
Yeah.
And again, it's not that's only for some and it's not for others, but everyone is given that investment and that mentorship and then the responsibility to kind of carry that cultural torch and that cultural story forward, which I think is a great image for one, but I think something that we have a lot to learn from. Yeah, Boris, you have a thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think the other thing that results from this structure is a real consistency of values across generation. Um, and one of the, I think the biggest challenges we see in kind of the workplace where you have kind of intergenerational strife is like, or at least a perceived difference in generational values. But through this kind of ritualized investment and mentorship in the next generation, there is a passing on and a teaching of those values. And it's not to say that they don't evolve in different ways and and they don't have to adapt those values to the day. But it just provides a level of consistency that I think is very hard to find, and certainly in an organizational setting where you have multiple generations working together. And that consistency of values is often one of the most powerful insights for people, that these values are really like they walk the walk and they talk the talk and they live these values in everything they do, in the way that they lead, and across every generation. And that's really powerful, people. And I think another insight is once you get to the elderhood, just like all the other age sets, it's limited in duration. So after 15 years as an elder, there's kind of almost a mandatory retirement where you go to become a senior elder, and you're in more of kind of an advisory consulting role. You're still highly respected in values, but your sort of influence and power and decision making is not solidified for the rest of your life once you become an elder. And I think certainly when we look at sort of challenges of political leadership, but equally within companies, I think there's something to be taken away there as well, right? Of like knowing when to start the succession planning and the handover to the next generation, and not just kind of riding out your leadership as long as you can.
Yeah, the succession planning and the role that we're asking people to play in terms of growing and developing the culture, that everybody, there's stages to it, and that there's the role that everybody has to play, which is, I think, a great thought. I know, Boris, you also talk, values are certainly at the core of Samburu people, and the way that they're thinking about how they approach everything that you were just describing. I've talked on past podcasts about, the role that empathy and trust and accountability right now in many of the teams and organizations I'm working with, of just how important that is. When it's missing, you can see it and people feel it. And when it's there, you can see that. Say more about kind of how the values play a role, or any reaction to even this idea of empathy, accountability, trust. How would they approach that?
Yeah, I've always liked your E.A.T, if I can use the E.A.T acronym, empathy, accountability, and trust. Those are not necessarily terms, and values are not a way of thinking or a concept that the Samburu would necessarily articulate. But I think Oli and I have observed that those three values are really strong within the Samburu culture. And that's yet another reason why it's a great, immersing oneself with the Samburu is a great opportunity to learn. And I think, empathy is the ability to understand what others are feeling and ideally feel what others are feeling. And I think you can't achieve that without a really strong sense of connection and without a lot of trust and accountability to the person with whom you're empathizing. And as Oli's outlined, that's the spirit in which all Samburu are raised, right? A deep sense of accountability to, connection to, and trust with those around them. But, when we ask the Samburu about something conceptual like a value, our colleagues will usually say, let me tell you a story. And it's an oral culture. So these values, they don't say to their children, you need to be empathetic and accountable, but they'll tell stories that show rather than tell. So a story that's always stuck with me, I suppose it's a story of a story of a story. But one of the three elders on our team, Stephen Labarakwe, has told us how his grandfather would always tell his father of a terrible drought that he had been a part of as a child or back in his day. And Stephen's father told the same story to Stephen, and Stephen has subsequently told it to his children. And it's a story how one family in the community lost everything. As Oli said, livestock is everything. You hold on to the last goat or cow or camel if you can, but one family was completely wiped out by this drought. And Stephen's grandfather seeing this, had just given the family some of his own remaining camels. He'd had a larger and healthier herd. Some had survived the drought. And so he gave some to this family so that they could rebuild themselves and sort of start afresh. And he told that story for generations within his family. I think, I would say as an example of the Naboisho philosophy of coming together, being connected, and being resilient by virtue of those connections, not of some blaze your own trail and, stick it out and grit it out yourself coming together. So fast forward 2 generations later, Stephen's brother actually suffered a very similar fate, lost everything in a very similar fashion to drought, and he's quite desperate. So he traveled a great distance on foot to find the descendants of the family that his grandfather had helped. And they too, as it turned out, had been told this story. So this story had been passed down multiple generations in multiple families, conveying the same values from different perspective. And so without blinking an eye, they gave Stephen's brother as many camels as they could spare at that time. And keep in mind, this is, 50 to 70 years after the original event. And there's no written records of any kind, no requests for identification, and probably no one left alive from when the original event had. But what there was is a huge commitment to empathy, to feeling what others are feeling, to trust, obviously, and engaging this, and to accountability. And accountability for the Samburu, what's really special about it, we think, is that it's not individual, it's collective accountability, and it's kind of eternal. It's not confined even to your lifetime. It's your family, your ancestors, your descendants, all are accountable for your actions, just as much as more or you are. So if you were to not help that family in their time of need, it's not that you would be individually punished, but you risk cursing your grandchildren because in their time of need, they will not be able to draw on Naboisho and on that community, in that community strength. So it's an incredible set of shared values. And I think that's just one of many stories that demonstrate the way that these E.A.T values are really solidified within the culture. And I think that the time horizons are really powerful, at least to me, and I think to a lot of our clients and participants, because we're so used to thinking in a modern business context of.
Sounds like you're freezing up on me there, Boris. 1 second. I'll transition here for a second. Looks like the connection broke. What I'll also say is, if for those listeners that are you're going to notice a number of things of what's happening from a culture shaping perspective to the story that Boris was just sharing. That if you remember back to me talking about the 6 A's of leading change and culture shaping, that part of that storytelling element is the articulating of a story, articulating the values in such a way that shows people, doesn't just tell them, but shows people what's happening. And then the anchoring of that is what's happening generation after generation, that's the culture shaping elements that are at play in the midst of the sharing of those stories. I also did another episode talking about the kind of 5 cultural stories that we need to be sharing within our organizations. And a part of that is the power of storytelling, but being able to show people through experiences and stories what it is that we're talking about in action and behavior. Oli, let me jump to you. You sent a nice note about my episode about listening being a superpower for leaders within cultures. How do the Samburu approach this? Because I know there's going to be some great wisdom in just this idea of listening.
Yeah, I think with the Samburu, they listen much more intently and much more patiently, and I think it speaks to their kind of wider attitude towards time, which is very in stark contrast, I guess, to people in the West. So they have this concept called the lazy tree of wisdom. And that's the tree that all of the elders get together around and debate and discuss and make decisions. And they often say in Samburu, there is always enough time. And I think that's because in the West, we tend to view time as a commodity. It's something that we spend, it's something that we invest, it can be saved, it can be wasted, we can be very protective about it. Whereas in a lot of African cultures, time really only passes when you act on or experience something. It's related to things happening, events and relationships. And so if there's nothing happening, then time isn't happening. You're not wasting time. It's almost like a stopwatch or a tap that you can turn on and turn off. And it kind of really flips things on its head. Because whereas I think in the West, we end up being slaves to time, a lot of African people really kind of feel that they actually kind of have much more control over time passing, and they spend a lot more time just listening patiently, and that means that their decision making is much less fraught. It's less time sensitive. There's a lot more time for them to really listen, to hear, to think, and they really kind of prioritize harmony over speed, particularly when it comes to decision making. Their focus is to make sure that they hear all of the different perspectives and only really make a decision when they reach some form of consensus, however long that takes, rather than feeling under pressure to move quickly and to do something that's sort of time sensitive. And we don't expect our executives that come away with us to necessarily, completely radically change their approach to
Right.
things or their attitude to things. Our whole approach is there some value in this completely radically different perspective? Is there something that you can benefit from here? For example, in the West, I think that we've become very, very short-termist. A lot of decisions are made on an annual basis. In politics, we really only ever look at the next sort of presidential cycle and the next parliament, and quite often a CEO is judged on the next quarter's financial results. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best environment for gaining all of these different perspectives and really making an informed decision.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm just hearing layered other wisdom throughout the years, the kind of seeking to understand before your need to be understood. This posture of listening and saying, hold on a second, before we act too quickly, let's step back and really think about, what is at stake, and are we in short-term thinking, or are we thinking about that kind of, other language, or the infinite game of like, what are we really doing here? So also here and there, this kind of participatory element of being able to, again, that everybody plays a role in, hey, I'm interested in what you think about it. I'm interested in how you might bring something to the situation that I can learn from. This also here a desire and an ability to have what we would call those courageous conversations. Like, let's sit under the tree and let's engage in that so that we can make a thoughtful decision about how we respond next. Boris, great to have you back, by the way, buddy. Good, and all the way from Kenya. So we get that sometimes there might be some technical difficulties, but before, are there any questions that you guys would have of me, or any kind of reflections on even just the things we're talking about today that you want to kind of give a final thought to before we wrap up our time together?
Well, in terms of questions for you, yeah, I'd just be curious to know if you think that, I think we talked about a lot in a short amount of time. We talked about resilience and accountability and different time scales and how we make decisions and meritocracy. Do you feel like there are other, I'm from the US, Oli's from the UK. Those are our home cultures, but we've been we've been here in Africa for a really long time. And so a lot of what we do is we spend time talking to experts and psychologists, neuroscientists, coaches, et cetera, and trying to understand, like, what do they see as the real challenges facing leaders in their societies. And then we look for ways in which our experience and time spent with the Samburu leaders can help address that in a meaningful way. And just be curious if there are others that come to mind for you that you're seeing or hearing with clients or through your podcast that you think maybe we should be exploring.
Yeah, no, there's so many. I appreciate the question, and there's so much in here that I just think resonates with me personally. For one, as I've told you from the beginning of our at least beginning relationship, but also just in these themes, how I talk about leadership and what I experience. I'll say it this way: I think people all around the world that I have been fortunate to connect with are thirsty for is experiencing that true, authentic bottom up leader, not top down leader. And seeing that this beyond this kind of cynical that it's about power and control, to see that somebody actually cares about them as a human being, that they actually are listening to them, they see value in them as a person and their gifts and skills, that they have a role to play. I could sit here and cite all the statistics that are coming out as recent data around that employee engagement across organizations just hit a 10-year low, that only 23% of employees right now say they trust their leaders and the future direction of their organization. We're living and working in a very low trusting environment, and yet at the same time, people are saying, only 20% of employees say I feel connected to my organizational culture. And yet 90% of them say that's exactly what I want. I want to feel like I'm connected. I want to be a part of a culture where I contribute to it, where who I am matters, and that I play a role in helping us create what we're trying to create into the future. And so I just, again, I see people desiring this connection and this connection to the culture, and wanting to be a co-creator in that culture, to set the temperature that they want for their life, let alone for the future of their organization.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it speaks very much to the heart of what we're doing, because I think, as Boris said earlier, we are living in this time of profound disconnection, more connectivity and less real meaningful connection. And that's the antithesis of the way that the Samburu live, and was one of the most sort of obvious contrasts that we noticed. And as we build the business, we recognize that there's so much more application than just business and executive leadership. We're looking at hosting multi-generational families and groups of friends. Everybody can benefit from the experiences that they would have with the Samburu elders.
I love it. Boris, one final thought on your end before we kind of wrap us up today?
Sure. Well, yeah, I appreciate your statistics. And I was just going to add one, because you talked about engagement hitting an all-time low. And I saw a statistic from DDI recently that teams led by self-aware leaders have 30% higher engagement and 32% higher profit. So this has real bottom line impact. And self-awareness, the greatest way to learn about yourself is to immerse yourself in others who are radically different from you, right? And by learning about those people, you become deeply self-aware of all the good, bad, and the ugly about how you show up as a leader. So whether it's with us or elsewhere, like immersing yourself in a very challenging foreign place and environment and culture far and different from your own is going to have a positive impact on your leadership. I don't think you can get more further and radically different and challenging than what we're offering. But and so we invite any of your listeners to reach out. And if you're really seeking that challenge and really trying to challenge your expectations of yourself, then this is an opportunity to really disconnect from the digital to reconnect with kind of those purpose and the values that drive your leadership and what you're trying to achieve as a leader. So we're always happy to talk with anyone who has even the slightest interest in what we're doing. And oftentimes the biggest concern is, can I really step out of my business and step out of my organization for 5 to 6 days? And I think if you can't, if you really think you cannot, then that's perhaps a symptom of some of the problems we're talking about, and therefore all the more reason to do it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate what you're creating, and most importantly, the spirit with which you're creating it with. And so it's awesome to support you guys in this way and share a little bit of your story and the wisdom that you're sharing and that you've learned and passing that on to others. And I look forward to staying in a relationship with you and continuing to learn more about what you're doing, because I think it's wonderful. We're going to put in the show notes SafariniLeadership.com, so people can track that down and we can share that with others. But I just want to say thank you guys for sharing and being on the pod today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, I hope today's conversation, great to chat with you guys. I hope today's conversation, breathed oxygen into anybody, gave you some time to think, to step back, and to think about that temperature that you're setting in your life and your work, and to really think about what is it that's driving the way that you approach your life, your work, and how we can learn from the people around us and continue to grow. None of us are finished products. We're all works in progress. And so continuing to learn and develop from each other, I'm really appreciative of today's conversation. So as always, I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts. One, I hope, again, everybody will subscribe and rate and review.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.